My name's Tim Philpot. I'm here at Brora Golf Club in the north of Scotland. I've come here today to tell my story. I'm going to do it as I walk around the golf course. I'm getting ready to go to the first tee and start when I was born in 1951. And I'm 72 years old now, and it just feels like it's time to tell my story. The story really starts, though, before 1951. Right here I am on the practice range, and on the range before the game even starts, my dad and mom met in 1939. They married in 1940. Were told they would never have any kids. But in 1947, they went to Asbury College in Wilmore, Kentucky, because my mother had met the Lord through a pastor from Asbury. They enrolled as freshmen in their mid-30s. And by the time they graduated in June 1950, sure enough, my dad, Ford Philpot, was not only a strong, passionate believer in Christ, but had become a preacher. And so they celebrated graduation by making me. I was born on March 18, 1951, almost 9 months to the day after graduation. My little brother Danny came along after me. And then the rest of our life really was following my dad all over the place as he preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm going to tell my story today. I'm going to go to the first tee, and each part of my life, I'm going to give myself a score. I finally decided the title for this little video will be Bogey Man. I make a lot more bogeys and double bogeys than I do pars. I'm kind of a bogey man, very ordinary, very average in most ways, but I'm looking forward to telling you my story as we walk around Brora Golf Club. So we're on the first tee here at Brora. The North Sea is to my right. I'm seeing a dog running on the beach down there. This is absolutely a beautiful place. In my first tee of my life, I'm giving myself a par. The 1950s, 51 to 59. I was living in Wilmore, of course, with my mom and dad, and it was almost just a perfect beginning to my life, and childhood was wonderful. The main thing I remember is that my parents often discussed the fact that my birth was some kind of miracle. They didn't expect to have any kids. And so when I was born, they were so thrilled, and they often talked about the fact that they couldn't wait to see what was going to happen with Timmy and Danny. They believed we were very special. And so I'm giving myself a par on this first hole. Just like a round of golf, my life got off to a good start. And after the first hole, I'm even par. Okay, we're on the second tee here at Brora, and you can hear the waves crashing behind me. It's an absolutely gorgeous par 4. And the second hole of my life really starts in 1959. We moved to Lexington, Kentucky. And from there until 1965, when I was 14, during those 6 years, I'm giving myself another par because life was pretty good during that time. I was playing Little League Baseball. I had started to play golf. My mother would drop me off at the par 3 course in Lexington on Mason Healy Road, where I would play 100 holes a day with my baseball grip. And life was, in some ways, never got any better than those 6 years in Lexington, Kentucky growing up. So I'm giving myself another par. I'm even par after 2 holes. Okay, we're on the third hole here at Brora, which is a long and difficult par 4. As you can see, Brora is famous because they've got sheep and cattle on the golf course, which makes it quite unique. Well, I'm giving myself a double bogey on the third hole. I was such a snotty-nosed, sarcastic little troublemaker that my parents sent me away to a high school in Florida for 9th and 10th grade. I was really not that happy in regular high school either when I got back to Kentucky. I went to Tates Creek High School. The only good point in it was that I did meet my wife, Sue, during this phase, but I was a phony. I was trying to pretend like I was a Christian with my parents and even with Sue. The truth is I was rotten to the core. And so from age 14 to about age 18, I entered Asbury as a freshman in 1969. I was the 5th man on a 4-man golf team. I had a 2.9 GPA. You can't be any more ordinary than me. And so there's no reason to think I was ever going to be any kind of success at all. And so my life during those years was in many ways unhappy, trying to figure out who I was. Clearly, I deserve a double bogey on the third hole, and I'm going to take it. So after 3 holes of my life, I'm 2 over par. So we're standing behind the third green, headed toward the fourth tee. As you can see here at Brora, we got sheep, We got 18 cows supposedly live here, including this absolutely gorgeous, beautiful Highland cow. There's 2 of them. I don't know if you can see them or not, but they roam the golf course and help keep the rough up. So I'm going to tell you about the 4th hole of my life, which I'm giving myself a birdie. On February 6, 1970, I was a freshman at Asbury College. The Asbury revival of 1970 had broken out, and on the 3rd night of that revival, I went to the altar and had a very dramatic, for me, a traumatic and dramatic conversion experience. The way I say it is that I didn't just start to believe, which is how most people kind of define their testimony, but I experienced God. In Isaiah 6, it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Well, that's how I felt. I saw the Lord. I experienced him very profoundly at age 18. And that carried over in the next 5 years were awesome. Sue decided that I might be worth marrying after that experience. And so at age 20, Sue and I got married. That's a birdie for sure. Transferred to the University of Kentucky and began to play golf on a golf scholarship. So my first 2 years at Asbury, my last 3 years of college was basically playing golf every day, and married to the beautiful Susan Davis, now Philpot. So I'm giving myself a birdie at that point in life, which was awesome. And now, as I head toward the 5th hole, I'm 1 over par. Well, the 5th hole at Brora this evening is beautiful. There's 10 Highland cows out here, for one thing, and it's one of the hardest par 4s on the golf course. And on the 5th hole of my life, I'm giving myself another double bogey, unfortunately. Even though I met the Lord, I began to wander away. At age 23, I was the 77th alternate to get into my class in law school, barely got in. But when you're in your 20s, you're just wrapped up with yourself and trying to prove that you can be somebody. And so I was kind of proud. I became proud of being a lawyer and really just lost my way. I spent almost no time at all in the Word. And the thing that bothers me in hindsight is that nobody really tried to help me because I looked good on the outside. You know, I was a young lawyer. I had a good-looking wife. I was the city golf champion. I was driving an old Mercedes that looked new. I was teaching Sunday school at a Methodist church. Why would anybody try to help me? They go find some sinner to help. Well, I needed a lot of help. And fortunately, I got a phone call when I was 31 years old that began the process of getting me out of this deep decline that I was in. But for those 8 years, from age 23 till about 31, I hate to say it, but I'm going to have to give myself another double bogey. So after 5 holes, I'm 3 over par in this bogey man adventure. Well, we're here on the 6th tee at Brora, which I think is the greatest par 3 in all of Scotland, in my opinion. It's really difficult. The green is awesome. But also in my little story, the 6th hole, I'm going to give myself a par again because the Lord answered my prayer. I was so desperate. I said, Lord, if something doesn't change, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And sure enough, I got a phone call when I was 31 years old from a guy named Paul Law, who invited me to be a part of a small group. And the next 3 years in my early 30s was very transformative in my life as I got involved in a small accountability group. And I got in CBMC had a program called Lifestyle Evangelism. I learned how to share my faith relationally. I learned that the best thing you can do to be an evangelist is to find friends and make friends. And then I also went through another program called EE, good old-fashioned evangelism explosion. The combination of the small group and EE and lifestyle evangelism through CBMC became very transformative for me over those next 3 years. So I got back on track. The Lord answered my prayer, and I'm giving myself a par there. So after 6 holes, I'm 3 over par. So the 7th hole here at Brora is kind of an easy par 4. There is this burn that runs in front of the green, but it's not a difficult hole. And the 7th hole, though, of my life turned out to be a double bogey again, because even though I had gotten into the Word, learned how to share my faith, I fell prey to a couple of curses in my life. Probably both come from my dad a little bit. The first one was a desire to be famous. My dad was a pretty famous TV evangelist, and somehow deep inside of me, it was this desire to be known. So I ran for office, county attorney, the prosecutor position in Lexington. It was a perfect fit for me, I thought. But I only had 8 years experience as a lawyer, and everybody knew that I wasn't ready for a job like that. I looked like I was in junior high, and I lost the election by 30,000 votes, which was a disaster. Borrowed money to try to win and lost. So it was a very difficult year on my wife and I. And then a couple years later, I just got it in my head that I needed to leave law and go into so-called full-time ministry. You know, even as a little boy, I'd heard all the stories that you get saved. And then you're secondly filled with the Spirit. And then thirdly, there's this full-time call, this call to full-time service, full-time ministry, giving it all. It's not enough to be a lawyer. So I tried for a year and a half to help my dad in ministry, thinking it was a call from the Lord. In hindsight, I think it was just the Lord giving me a chance to spend more time with my dad, who died not too much later than that. But it was really mostly a disaster, those late 30s from 34 to 39. I was kind of glad when it was all over with, but I got to give myself a double bogey. I hate to say it, but that's my third double bogey in the first 7 holes. I'm 5 over par and making my way toward a bogey man. Okay, so we're on the 8th hole, which is a beautiful par 5. The ocean on the right still, the North Sea. And we're now down where you can see the mountains in the background that go right down into the sea. 8th hole is beautiful out here toward the end of the course. We must be 3 miles away from the clubhouse by now. But the 8th hole of my life also, I got back on track. I'm going to give myself a par here because even though I double bogeyed in my 30s, good old Dr. Lewis Hicks came to me when I was 39 years old and asked me to run for the Kentucky Senate. I said, well, that seems crazy. I'm going to India for a 5-week mission trip. I still owe money from my last campaign. My wife hates politics. I'm going to have to say no, Dr. Hicks. If it was handed to me on a silver platter, I would take it. I would love to be a senator, but it needs to be handed to me on a silver platter. Well, wouldn't you know it, the senator who I was supposed to be replacing passed away in his sleep in June of 1990. We had a special election that I won by 2 votes. That's a long story we don't have time for. But I became a senator at that time. And my first 4 years in the Kentucky State Senate was very different for most people. I fought hard for the pro-life movement. I was very much in the middle of all the public issues of that day, including mostly the abortion issue and pro-life stuff. And wouldn't you know it, I got reelected in 1994. So those 4 years, 90 to 94, allowed me to kind of get my life back on track. I was also finding more success as a lawyer. So all of a sudden, I'd won this $1 million case, which kind of allowed me to get out of debt and got my name in the paper and meant that I was maybe had a chance to be somebody, be successful in the professional world. So those were good days for me from 90 to 94. The Lord enabled me to get a par to get me back on track. So after 8 holes, I'm still 5 over par. We are at the 9th tee, and I love the 9th hole here. I had a hole-in-one in 2019 playing with Jeff Hopper. So naturally, this is my favorite hole. Just a short little par 3. You look right out over the sea, and then the mountains behind. It's just a gorgeous hole. Well, the 9th hole of my life, I'm going to give myself another par, which means I'm 5 over after 9. I'm going to shoot 40 on this front 9. But those years in my 40s, I was not only a trial lawyer, but I also was a state senator, and then I took a position with CBMC International as the president that enabled me to teach and preach ministry to business and professional people all over the world. Eventually, I traveled to 67 countries, but I was busy. I had 3 jobs at one time. It was way too much, but I was having a great time, and Sue was very supportive of everything I was doing during those days. So I'm going to give myself a par. I'm 5 over, shot 40 on the front 9. Let's see what the back 9 holds for me, trying to break 80. So the 10th hole at Brora gets you headed back toward the clubhouse. It's a long par 4. I seem to bogey it every time I play it. And in my life story, I'm going to give myself a bogey on this 10th hole as well, even though it all seemed very good at the time. I was the international president for CBMC from 1997 till 03. I was 52 years old, traveling the world, having a good time for the most part. But the bottom line is I had fallen prey again to this full-time ministry trap, thinking that I could do more for the Lord if I would leave the law practice and leave politics and just give him everything. Give him all my time. And to be honest, there was nothing wrong with that, but it was not for me. And I began to get an itch to go back to the legal field in some way or another, go back and be a lawyer. I got tired of all the travel. And while I'm sure I did a lot of good while I was working full-time for CBMC, for the most part, looking back on it, I'm gonna give myself a bogey. Maybe I don't deserve it, I'm not sure, but it sure feels like I do. So after 10 holes, I'm 6 over par. So the 11th hole here at Brora is a par 5, great hole. Got a very tricky little burn here in front of the green that catches a lot of people. And for me, on the 11th hole of my life, I have to give myself another double bogey because it's the year 2003. I was ending my time with CBMC International. I felt this strong urge to go back home and just be a lawyer again, leave the full-time ministry kind of thing behind. And friends of mine said, hey, wait a minute, there's a judge position open. You could probably win that election. So I ran for circuit judge. And wouldn't you know it, I lost again. Oh my, that's 2 elections I've lost. And I promise you, losing an election in your hometown is no fun. It was very depressing. In fact, for a couple of months, I was completely unemployed and wasn't sure what I was gonna do. I had left a beautiful situation with CBMC, and now I had nothing. So I'm giving myself a double bogey. That means that after 11 holes, I'm 8 over par. This is the 12th hole at Brora, great little par 4. Very difficult small green that we're standing on right now. It's very hard to par this hole. But on the 12th hole of my life, I'm actually gonna give myself a birdie. In November '03, I lost that election, which meant I was unemployed, but a good friend of mine, Ernie Fletcher, was elected governor of Kentucky. And there was an opening in family court in Lexington, and he appointed me to that position where I was able to remain and win a couple of elections and stay there for over 14 years in family court. And I give myself a birdie during those years because, not because I was such a great judge, but because I learned so much. Those were the years in which I began to learn about the love of God. I had always seen God as my judge. I did a pretty good job of seeing him as my father. But I began to see Jesus himself as my lover during those years. I began to understand marriage. I wrote a book in 2016 called Judge Z, Irretrievably Broken, based on a lot of things I had learned during my years in family court. So God was very gracious to me and allowed me to make a birdie on that part of my life. So after 12 holes, I am, what am I, 7 over par? I've forgotten. I think I'm 7 over par now. Let's hope it all works out. The 13th hole, again, has to be one of my favorites. It's where Jeff Hopper made his hole-in-one in 2019. We rejoiced together as we both had hole-in-ones on this back 9. But it's just an awesome little par 3. It's called the Snake. That's because the creek that the cows are munching around this evening snakes around in front of this green. But the 13th hole of my life was another double bogey, sad to say. I wrote this book, Judge Z, Irretrievably Broken, while I was a family court judge, thinking everybody would celebrate with me as I attempted to define marriage, as I attempted to celebrate marriage, as I attempted to talk about what a tragedy it is that divorce is so easy in America. But instead of being celebrated, I was attacked. I had 4 Judicial Conduct Commission complaints filed against me. I had 2 lawsuits that were very serious. Now, I won them all, but it was very painful. There was a couple of years of a lot of pain, and I finally decided it was just time to quit. And in December 31 of 2017, I decided it would be my last day as a family court judge. So the last couple of years were very difficult. I'm glad I did it, though. But nevertheless, I got to give myself a double bogey because it didn't turn out like I really hoped it would and created a lot of pain for my wife and me and our family. So I'll give myself a double bogey. That means after 13 holes, I'm 9 over par. Par is 70 here, thankfully, so I can still break 80 if I can somehow par from this point forward. All right, the 14th hole, short little par 4, but that's a lot of fun, headed back toward the clubhouse. And I'm gonna give myself a par in life as well on the 14th. I retired in January of 2018. And so for the last 5 years, Sue and I have been living mostly in South Alabama. We come to Scotland in the summertime to get out of the heat. But these last 5 years have been wonderful, especially has given me time to write. I'm turning myself into an author as much as possible. I've written a novel called Player's Progress, A Golfer's Search for Wisdom. I hope you'll get a copy of it. It's been a wonderful experience for me to write the book and continue to write devotionals as much as possible and sit in my little chair up in my office in Alabama, which has become a very holy place for me, sitting every morning, waiting on God, writing my stuff, reading a lot. It's been a wonderful time just finishing up these last few years of life. So I'm giving myself a par. After 14 holes, I'm 9 over par. I got 4 holes left. Let's get to the 15th tee. Well, we made it. We're on the 15th tee. And that's really the point of this whole exercise. My story is finished, you would think. I'm age 72. I hate to kind of quote myself from my book, Player's Progress, but Lucas was 72 years old at the time of the story. And he walks in the pro shop, and they told him when he got to Hokema Golf Club that the green fees were everything he owned. And if he wanted to play golf there, he had to give everything, kind of like Jesus when he looked at Peter and the boys and says, I need everything. And so there's a line in the book where Lucas simply says at age 72, he knew it was time to give it all. And that's what he did. And I've decided I'm going to do the same thing. I kind of thought by the time I would be in my 70s like this, that I would be slowing down, sitting in my easy chair, taking it easy. But I'm finding more fruit in ministry and more joy in living in my 70s than ever before in my whole life. I can't wait to see what the 70s look like. I can't wait to see what the 80s look like. I've even got some hope that I might make it into my 90s like my mom did. My grandfather lived to be 104, so I think I'm just on the 15th tee right now of life. I fully realize it's possible I'm on the 18th green. Maybe I'm going to have a heart attack or die quickly. Who knows? My father only made it to 74. I'm really not sure how long I have to live. But the bottom line is the Lord has shown me that it's not time to quit. It's time to give it all at age 72. I hope you've enjoyed my journey. I hope this will encourage you to tell your story, to think about your journey. I know I'm 9 over par on the 14th tee, or on the 14th green after 14 holes, but on the 15th tee, I got 4 holes left to play. The legacy of my life will probably be told by these last 4 holes that haven't been played yet. So I'm hoping to be faithful to the end. Thank you for listening to my story here at Brora Golf Club in Scotland.